Hi there. Today we're talking about how to plan one of your first 14er climbs. Hello again everyone, I'm Jason, and we're continuing our series of how-to videos for attempting to summit non-technical mountains above 14,000 feet, 14ers. We've covered fitness and gear, and now we're taking on the topic of planning your climb. Our next video will cover acclimatization. Any plan is going to start with your objective and a route. We're talking about non-technical 14ers, so that leaves out the 14ers in Alaska and Washington. When you exclude Alaska, the 14ers are the tallest peaks in the United States, so there are a lot of people who climb them, and therefore there's information available to help you make your plan if you know where to look. The easiest 14ers to find beta on, beta being climber jargon for route information, are the Colorado 14ers. And we're going to start by talking about those Colorado peaks. But everything I say about what types of information you're looking for and the planning that you should be doing are applicable to the California peaks. So just hang on and we'll come to the California information resources a bit later. You can one-stop shop at 14ers.com to get all sorts of information on the Colorado 14ers and their routes, if you register, which is free and which comes with no unsolicited communication. You can even download GPX files to move to your mapping software or a GPS device. So I would make it a point of visiting the website. From there, what am I looking for? You can filter peaks and routes by class difficulty, class 1 being maintained trail, class 2 being broken trail, often with some minor route finding, class 3 usually requiring some handholds to get up over big steps or small boulders, class 4 requiring footholds and serious consequences if you fall, and class 5 is fully roped technical climbing. You can also look up routes by round trip distance. Each route will also note its total vertical gain. The route summaries will even tell you exposure level. That's how much the route takes you over areas with a lot of open air around you, and the rockfall potential. Detailed information on the routes include photos and written walkthroughs, and you can also look up trip reports filtered by peak and by month to get a sense of the typical conditions for the month that you're planning your attempt. Other information includes the trailheads with links to the coordinates for Google Maps if you're registered and logged in, and a link to localized weather forecasts for your peak that are done from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So what 14ers make a good set for people who are newer to this activity? Well, that's dependent on a lot of factors. Location matters relative to where you're staying. Two-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive roads to the trailhead matters. Round-trip hiking distance matters. As we just talked about, the class of the climb, the exposure, and other dangers like rockfall matter. Luckily, 14ers.com has a route selection tool. You can make a selection across all of these criteria and others. A few rules of thumb for those of you new to 14ers. Certainly go with regular routes rather than snow or couloir climbs, couloirs being snow-filled gullies. If you're doing this in the summer, those are not going to be good routes in dry conditions. I'd stay with standard routes, which will make route finding a lot easier. And I think class 1 and class 2 hikes are all fair game. Just be aware that class 2 will be harder on your ankles as you balance over talus. The risk category ratings are all very conservative on the website. I would set these to moderate. But I would also note that 14ers are not your average day hike. There's more inherent risk when you're above tree line for that long. If a storm rolls in, it could take you an hour or more to get back to someplace safe. So your commitment to the climb is higher. There's also more risk with climbs that gain a lot of vertical because you have more opportunity to get in positions that have exposure, that is a lot of air around you. And there's more mountain above you, so the opportunity for rockfall is also higher. That doesn't mean that 14ers offer no easy retreats, that they're all a bunch of exposed positions where a fall from anywhere could mean a drop of hundreds of feet or more, or that rocks are tumbling on you like you're a pin in a bowling alley. What it does mean is that 14ers are to be respected in ways that a local lake hike sometimes doesn't have to be. And as far as route finding, I think you won't have any problems on any of the Colorado 14er standard routes, as they're well marked and well beat down. due to the number of travelers. So let's assume that we've selected the standard Southwest Ridge route on Mount Sherman as our first 14er. This is a pretty good one to start on, and both of my 6-year-old boys made this their first 14er, as did my nephew when he was 8. When you think you know the route that you want, we can now view the route descriptions with all the walkthroughs and photos that I mentioned earlier, and then I can also go into those trip reports. Once we've confirmed that this is our chosen route, we'll need to break our trip down into stages, back planning from this very fundamental point. The mountains produce thunderstorms in the warm months, so the general rule is you must be off the summit by noon in order to avoid the threat of lightning. I actually prefer to be off the summit by 11 a.m. The reason is that I want to be back down below tree line by noon, where the trees offer some better natural protection against lightning. Everything else we plan is dependent upon that reality. The first thing I want to know is, when do I need to be at the trailhead in order to give myself enough time to be off the summit by 11 a.m.? You can look up user hike times on the website, but I find them unreliable for mere mortals because they're filled with posts of the uber fit who like to run, literally, up 14ers. For those just starting out, not knowing this can influence you to shorten your expected times in ways that can be dangerous. So to come up with my plan, I like to break down my 14er climbs into 3 broad stages. Stage 1 is from the trailhead to the point where the climb starts to get steep. Usually this is either at a basin if you're climbing up the slopes of one of the mountain's faces, or it's at the point where you attempt to gain a ridge if you're doing a ridge route. For Mount Sherman, you get into a basin and then gain a ridge, so the basin is really the first point where you'll start to experience steeper hiking. For that stage 1 into the basin, distance is the governing factor. You want to think about how fast you walk on mildly uphill ground. You should learn this from your training hikes that we discussed in our last video on fitness. Let's say that it's about 2 miles per hour. You also need to know not the total route distance, but the distance of my stage 1 into the basin. So I can download the GPX file if I've registered for free on 14ers.com and import it into another excellent free website, CalTopo. Here you can see the GPX is actually only accounting for the upper basin to the summit, so I need to fill in the rest of the route from the trailhead. Well, if I complete the route line for the approach from the 2-wheel drive trailhead, it happens to be about 2 miles on the approach from the trailhead to the basin. So at 2 miles per hour, that's about 1 hour. Now I need to know how many vertical feet per hour I climb when things get steep. So I'm shifting from distance to vertical gain. Again, this is stage 2. And again, this is something that you should know from your training hikes. But you also want to factor in altitude. So assume 80% in comparison to what you've done not at altitude. So if you've been doing 1,000 vertical feet per hour, which is a good benchmark, then assume you're going to be doing about 800 feet per hour at altitude. Well, from the basin point at about 12,000 feet, I need to go to just over 14,000 feet as Mount Sherman stands at 14,036 feet. So I need to do 2,000 vertical feet and will do so at 800 feet per hour. So that's about 2.5 hours. Add in my earlier approach time of an hour and I'm at 3.5 hours from trailhead to summit. By that math, I need to be heading up the trail starting at 7:30 a.m. to make the summit by 11 a.m. But I also may want to build in some safety margin, so maybe 7 a.m. is my start time leaving from the trailhead. I can also set a turnaround time. If I'm not on the summit by say 11:30 or 30 minutes past my goal time of 11, I'm turning around no matter what, so as to avoid the afternoon lightning risks. Now, a little side note here, if I'm attempting a really popular peak with parking issues, like say Gray's Peak, then the need to find a parking space may trump all of these calculations. I may need to arrive at the trailhead by 3 or 4 a.m. on a weekend so as to have an opportunity to park without having to park miles down at the bottom of the road. Now remember that it's generally okay to start earlier than needed, but it's almost never okay to start later than you planned. Just make sure that your headlamp is charged and has fresh batteries if you're starting out in the dark. As for the last stage, stage 3, the descent, unless you have issues with bad knees or bad hips, you can count on about half as much time heading down as heading up. This is something else that you should be able to dial in by monitoring your training hikes. Using our Mount Sherman example then, if we're planning a 3.5 hour up, maybe 2 hours down at the max. So that's the hike itself, but what about getting to the trailhead? This is easy. Google Maps. You can click on the trailhead link in the route description and then cut and paste the coordinates into Google Maps so that you can get your driving directions. So here I have about a 2.5-hour drive from the place that I'm staying in Denver. If I'm heading up the trail at 7 a.m., that means I need to leave my location in Denver at 4:30 a.m. to be on time. You can see why a lot of people choose to camp near trailheads when it's allowed. I also need an hour or so to wake my groggy self up, get dressed, get ready, so I'm setting my alarm for 3:30 a.m. Now that's all assuming standard weather patterns, but let's check the weather. The weather may adjust my plan's times, it could tell me which day to go, and it will certainly inform my clothing choices. As I mentioned, 14ers.com allows you to click on the NOAA forecast and get a local weather forecast for the peak itself. You can see that the forecast box is at or near the summit, and you can read the summary forecast statements, but the real value is in the graph. So let's go ahead and click on it. You can select the date range up to 7 days out, but be aware that localized weather forecasts don't really get accurate until about 3 days out. To orient you at what you're looking at, you have hours across the bottom of each graph section, and the various metrics are going up the side of the graph. So the grayed out sections are the times after the sunset and before the sunrise, when it's dark, and the light sections are when the sun is up. This will help you identify how much headlamp time you might be needing. For our hypothetical Sherman climb, recall that we wanted to leave the trailhead at 7 a.m. and let's say that we were looking at Sunday, August 8th as the date of our climb. You can see that based on the light and dark sections that we're not really going to be burning through headlamp batteries. We really just want the headlamp at this point for contingencies like an unplanned overnight stay if someone should get injured or something. The top graph has ambient temperature in red. If we were in the colder months, you would also see a blue line for the wind chill. The green line is the dew point, which tells you something about humidity. Dew point is the temperature that the air needs to be cooled to in order to achieve 100% humidity. That's where you'd see condensation on things. So since the red line never gets below the green line, you're not going to have condensation, so no slippery rocks or tundra. That would be a very rare thing in the dry air of elevation anyway. The next section is wind speed and direction. The lighter purple line is the consistent wind speed, and the darker purple line is the speed of your wind gusts. You'll also notice that there are these little flags attached to the light purple line. This tells you the direction the wind is coming from. For our Sherman climb, we're looking at winds 10 to 17 miles per hour coming out of the west. So on the southwest ridge route, that means it will be off of our left and slightly in our face as we're heading northwest on the approach. Section 1. Once we gain the ridge, it will be off of our left and slightly at our back. So wind in your face feels colder than wind at your back, largely because you have a backpack on most of the time. And when we combine it with the temperature information, we get an idea of what layers we're going to want and when. So temps are in the upper 30s at the start of the day, and with the wind in our face, in the coldest part of the morning, we may want to think about gloves and the like. We're also probably going to want to start out with our fleece on. By the summit time, it may be warm enough to get down to a single layer. Runners have a rule of thumb to dress as if it's 30 degrees warmer than it actually is due to the heat that you generate from the exercise. And while you're definitely generating heat while you're climbing a 14er, you aren't producing as much heat as if you were running. So I cut the rule of thumb in half. I dress as if it's 15 degrees warmer than it actually is. This is something you should monitor as you get more climbs under your belt. What was the wind speed and temperature? And what was I wearing? Was I hot or was I cold? And what would be the ideal temperature at home, not exercising, for what I happen to be wearing? Now the third graph has your humidity, cloud cover, and precipitation potential. Sky cover should tell you about your sun protection needs, like hats and sunglasses and sunscreen. Precipitation potential is pretty self-explanatory. If there were to be a higher potential for precipitation, the next graph down would tell you how much rain or sleet or snow would be falling and when. And the final graph shows the chance of thunder. Read this as likelihood of lightning. Now, if we back up a few days from Sunday the 8th to earlier in the week, you'll see the typical afternoon thunderstorm pattern that we get in the summer months in Colorado. You can see that the rain and thunder chances increase right around noon. So Sunday the 8th is looking like a really good day to climb. If we take a look at another graph for another peak, you can see a day that is kind of iffy. If you've done a few peaks and you really know your speed, you can time out that climb to beat those afternoon thunderstorms. But if you still have a lot of unknowns, maybe it's better to wait for a better forecast. And here you can see a do not climb forecast, pretty self-evidently. The last logistics component involves keeping your body running with water and energy. I try to take in some water every half hour and food every hour. By the time you feel thirsty, you are already dehydrated. And by the time you feel your energy deplete, you may be too late to re-energize enough to keep your pace and reach your summit by your turnaround time. So how many half-hour water stops are you going to take for a 5.5-hour round trip? Well, that's 10 or 11 breaks. And if you take in 100 milliliters of water per stop, then you need a full liter for your hike. And 100 milliliters is, I think, the floor of what you could potentially need to stay hydrated. If you've got a bigger body, you're probably going to need more water. Now we do the same calculation with food. I want to take in 60 to 100 calories at each stop on the hour. I'm about 5'6" and weigh about 140 pounds. So if you have a bigger body, you're going to burn energy faster and you're going to want to take in more calories. So I need about 500 calories worth of snacks for this 5.5-hour climb. So there's our plan. We've chosen an objective and a route. We know the weather so that we can bring the right equipment, and we've identified the good days to climb. We've identified our itinerary for the day as well, from the time that we wake up to the time that we get back to the car after the climb. Now we can relay this plan to someone who's in our life who cares. This is an important safety protocol. Someone not climbing with you should know your route and your planned itinerary. And you should call that person when you're back in cell phone range. That way, if they don't hear from you after a set number of hours after your expected time, they can call the sheriff in the county in which you're climbing, and that will kick into motion the search and rescue. Of course, if you're carrying a personal locator beacon, you can also contact search and rescue on your own if needed. And with some devices, you can have your family and friends follow along with your GPS tracks so that they get a sense of what's going on with you as your hike is playing out. So that's Colorado then. What about California? That's harder. California's 14ers are harder to get to and therefore less populated, and you're more likely to be isolated and therefore need to have more experience and skill so that you can be self-sufficient on them. And it's harder to find information on the routes because there's less people doing them. As a starting resource, there's a blog out there called She Dreams of Alpine. She gives good summary overviews of all of the 14ers in California and provides links to more detailed information for those peaks that she's attempted. Beyond that, there's a number of good guidebooks that can help, but it's always good to have current information because mountains change. Routes get rerouted due to rockfall or conservation areas. Permit needs change and come into and out of existence. For the California 14ers, a brand new guide at the time of this recording is about to launch, Falcon Guides Climbing California's 14ers. It's going to be released on September 1st, 2021. What I can say about these resources and your own research into the California 14ers is that you're looking for the same information that I described earlier. You want to select a peak and a route that's within your abilities. Once you know a peak and a route name, you can research in the guidebooks as well as search online for trip reports. You can still use the Caltopo application to draw on your route or import a GPX file if you can find one. You simply type in the peak name and you'll get Caltopo to bring you to the area around the summit. Now you can do some timing and planning like we talked about earlier. You can still use the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website to look at the weather. With this site, you need to input a nearby city. Then click, hold, and drag the map to your nearby peak, and then single click over the summit to get the forecast area to cover that particular localized forecast. Now you can do the same planning that we talked about with weather, clothing layers, and the like. It takes a bit more work, but solid planning is still possible. So that's how someone who's new to climbing 14ers can begin to plan their early 14er attempts. Do any of you have resources that you like to use to develop your trip plans? Let us know in the comments section. If you want additional thoughts related to this video and every video that we produce, along with links to the equipment we discuss, sample gear lists, sample itineraries, and links to other outdoor resources, please visit our website at shortguysbetaworks.com. The link's in the description below. And if you want to be alerted as we release new content, please subscribe and ring that bell. We produce educational content like this, as well as short films of our family adventures, and we release something new every week. So if you have ideas for content that you'd like to see, please let us know those in the comment section too. We'll see you next week for our episode on acclimatizing for 14er climbs, and keep on getting more out of that big outside.